Hey everyone, it's Will, GamerDad, with another video for you. So first off, I'd like to give a shout out to one of my Patreon supporters, Ben. Thanks for your support. Now in today's video, we're actually going to do something a little bit different. I had this idea because I had a lot of subscribers ask me about things to clarify on either points of my video, either during the AF or setup or just the DPS or the requirements. So in this back to basics video, I wanted to actually discuss my view on how to watch a video. Now, if you haven't already, make sure you like and subscribe to my channel. I really appreciate it. And I also do have a Patreon account for those who want to support me this way. Okay, so I'm just going to bring up one of my teams that I have used for bosses. And one thing about this video is that when you were following videos back in the day on YouTube to help with clears, they were really easy to follow. Let's be honest. All you need to do is watch for the moves, watch for the buffs, and the roster, and that's pretty much all you need to do. Keep in mind, in the early days, there wasn't any Grasta, and certainly not any Grasta ore. There weren't as many types of equipment and specialized equipment, and also we have the ability to GMO our units. Remember, genetically modify, which is kind of like customizing them with things like Earth Calamity, where a unit that's not Earth now has Earth, and other things like that. And so it's a lot more difficult to kind of follow the specialized setups that each person may do in their clears on YouTube. Nowadays, I would argue that equipment and Grasta is probably the most important feature to follow and to check on a video when doing a clear. So this video is actually going to do a couple of, segments, and we're going to break it down into watching different parts of the video. Now, for myself, for example, I usually show my setup, equipment, and Grasta at the very back of the video, and so depending on which video you are watching, you would just check out the equipment and Grasta as well as the roster before kind of committing to that clear. Because remember, if you don't have the units, it may be difficult to get the exact clear, or it might end up being a failure. And depending on the two units in the back and their qualities, that also may be substitutable or not substitutable. Okay, so for example, obviously we're going to see our units here for my 1A Pierce team. And the first thing you're looking at is, who are your front four units? And what are their roles? So obviously, if you're newer to the game and you don't really have a full kind of understanding of all the different units, what you're looking for is probably things like, who is the zone setter? Who's the DPS? Who's the support? Does this video require defensive or just all-out attack where you're not taking hits? And finally, in the back, what are those two units there for? And, how are they related to the front four? Because usually, the people in the back, their roles are mostly Grasta holding, although occasionally they do VC in or to activate some abilities. So in this case, what you're looking for is ASU Kino is, of course, our Pierce Zone Setter. We have Suzette being one of our three DPS. We have Alter Tuva, which has a number of offensive, defensive support capability, as well as a DPS. And we have Alma, of course, as an extremely powerful Pierce unit DPS. Now, we are looking for, what is Curio doing there? Curio is not really a Pierce unit, so let's go directly into it here. And the first thing you should look for is, what their setups are. A lot of times the equipment isn't the main focus in the units in the back. What you're looking for is, how many Grasta slots does the unit in the back have? And what is each of the Grasta slots? Keep in mind that if you try to substitute certain things, like say you don't have all the Grasta slots, or you don't have all the specific Grasta, you may not be able to follow or do as much damage. Remember that when you are following a video, it's kind of following like a recipe in like a cookbook. If you have everything, your cake is going to turn out fine. Sometimes you can take out a little bit of sugar and you'll still taste all right. However, if you take out the flour, or you use one type of thing instead of the other, hey, your cake might be flat or hard or just unpalatable. In this case of Curio, you can see what we're doing here. And orange, remember that orange Grasta means they have an ore. A lot of times we are using these units in the back to share Grasta. So you can clearly see that not only that this unit gets HP damage, when the HP is maxed, the damage is higher by 30%. Now you can see that bracketed capital P. All units, when they have HP max with this personality, which is Lost Lab, increases their damage by 30%. And then let's review what kind of units we have on this team. Suzette is a Lost Lab. And we also have Alter Tuva, which is also a Lost Lab. So these are kind of the things you're looking for in the initial kind of glance overs when you're doing a video review on how to follow. And then of course, the same thing, a multi-power Lost Lab, sharing type attack increase, so that's extra damage. And then we have some special units, special Grasta that aren't necessarily for damage, but they do help share some abilities. And so you really should be looking for that. In the case of VC Grastas in the back, probably not required unless they're going to come into the front line at some point, because they don't share usually. And our second unit is a Pierce unit. And let's see, if I have no equipment on it in terms of weapons and no gear and no badge, very much likely they're going to stay in the back, because if they went to the front, they'd get one-shotted. And so you can clearly see that the VC Grasta, again, is not necessary. The Lance things are all orange, and they are sharing. And in this case, we chose the Power of Gale Lance to share extra damage for Wind Lance moves, which is obviously powering Suzette's moves. Now, the next thing you are looking for that you should be really reviewing is checking if the unit has a manifest or true manifest, because if they do, it's extremely important to have that, because those abilities are not substitutable through any other method. You can see that the weapon gives power and speed, and the moves themselves are much different. So if you have a non-manifested Suzette, you're not going to have this massive damage with 2 times XL Pierce AoE, with increased damage times 9 if you have both poison and pain, and stackable wind attacks of user 50% and guaranteed crit. Most likely you'll have a non-crit one that does a lot less damage, and then you'll wonder why you're not doing hundreds of millions of damage with one hit. And like I said earlier, we are looking for whether or not a unit is carrying special Grasta. Remember that the front line units usually have DPS Grasta, that is pain and poison type Grasta. In the case of Yukino, when I do review that holding, you can see she's actually holding Grasta, and that's to share and give extra damage to bow units such as Alma. It's actually not for herself. Usually a Grasta holder is not your main DPS. That should give you a clue of the way that the person who created the video decided to set up their team. Now, other special things to look out for is whether or not they have things like zone Grasta. In this case, obviously you'll need this, because if you didn't need this, the creator of the video wouldn't have put that on their team, right? So this is a zone move, for example. Other specialized Grasta that we are watching for that you will require if to want to follow that video are things like true prayer video, Grastas. There are certain things like falcons. They are not substitutable, because a lot of times you require those special abilities in order for the clear to happen. Also, interesting things to watch out for is things like proficiency debuff, things like power of benefic, which increases the length of lunatic and stuff like that. So really watch out for that. Other things to watch out for is if they have abilities to carry 2 badges, look at the badges and what they are. Because if they are just stat badges, the stats directly affect the DPS. However, if they have weird badges, and what I mean by weird or unique badges are things like, for example, Falcon or Fresh Shield is a very specialized one. Remember that Fresh Shield actually gives the unit a move, and that can actually make the difference between success and failure, especially if you rely on things like that to change a DPS into a hybrid DPS and healer as well. These are things that you're watching for. Not only that, but if they have 4 Grasta slots and 2 badges, that is 200 light or shadow or higher, and they're in the front 4, it's very possible that you require all of that as a minimum requirement to do the clear. That is because of the 4 Grastas, 2 badges, and if they're all stat badges like power or int, that is required to do the high levels of DPS you probably see in the videos, which can make the difference between success and failure. So, you would call videos like that whale videos that require like 200 shadow, 200 light, and stuff like that. Okay, so that's just the first part of the review of the video, where you are kind of making sure you understand the role of the units and making sure you are copying like a recipe, either word for word in terms of item for item, or very similar stats and moves. You definitely want the equipment to match as well, because each equipment actually has special abilities as well. In the case of time-twisted ones, Glimmer Bangle actually gives extra damage, and that might make a difference in your DPS, critical strength, speed, and type debuff resistance 15%. Sometimes they are not nearly as important. And so again, you can always try to see if you don't have the gear that is in the bracelets or the rings or whatever, and see if you can do it when you follow the video. Sometimes you can, a lot of times you can't. Special note of things like Moon Realm gear that helps prevent statuses, for example, or Bracelet of Might, for example, where these are required for increased damage when max HP. There's a lot of these kind of things that, you probably see in other videos as well. Make a note of that, use the wiki, and try to grind those out if they are necessary, or if you see them a lot in different videos. Because let's be honest, if you're using them now, or if other people are using them now, you're very highly likely to be using them in the near future as well. Because, gear is great and it's permanent as well. All right, so in the next part of the video, we're going to cover what key points to watch for in the videos during the fight itself. And so I've taken two examples here. In my first example, we're going to cover how to watch a non-AF video. And it's a little bit different. It's actually quite a bit easier to follow. First of all, non-AF clears are usually low turn clear, so there's just less to watch, which is great. One thing you need to remember is that, especially in non-AF clears, each turn and the order of the moves is extremely important. The reason for that is a lot of times your DPS might be one receiving all the buffs, or you need to cast a shield or debuff ahead of the boss's moves. Because let's be honest, most of these videos you're watching because you are fighting super bosses. So that's the first thing to watch out for. Next, watch not only the order of the moves, watch which moves the video's creator is doing. Again, a lot of times the front four units cannot be substituted because of the types of moves they are. And let's be honest, those units themselves are probably extremely powerful and have specific capabilities that lesser units do not have. So, for example, say you have 3 out of 4 and you're like, I'm not sure what AS Radius does. Let me just put in some other tank like, like Sora AS or Garen Barrel. That actually may not work, especially in this case where AS Radius is tanking 3 hits. So something to keep in mind in that sense. And especially with non-AF videos, if you miss on any one part, either the roster construction, the move set, and the order of the moves, most likely will result in failure. A lot of times that, you'll miss that key buff on your DPS to help win the fight, or the key shielding where you, end up getting one-shotted. And remember, a lot of times also low turn clear videos, such as non-AF videos, are relying on high-level DPS to either get through HP stoppers or act first and deal the DPS instead of the enemy dealing DPS to you. As for the setup, we did talk about that obviously in the early parts of the video. You can see that in this video, deficiency, proficiency, Grasta, or shared was required for this video. And so obviously in this case, do not think that you could substitute by having lesser Grasta or other Grasta. Your DPS should have the standard pain and poison Grasta and the enhanced versions, which is either MP consumption, aka Rose with Thorns, Bullseye, or other things like that. Now, in my second example here, we're going to talk about how to watch or look at key points during an AF video. In this case, we're taking on the dual Hachos with my 5-star Aisha review. Note that we started off with a zone as well as a first turn AF. And a lot of times, if you are having trouble following all the moves within the AF, my recommendation is to slow the video on YouTube to either half speed or quarter speed. The AF is actually going to be the bulk of your DPS in the video. And so the thing about each turn's moves are important, or how the buffs and debuffs and DPS during outside AF, they are still important, although possibly not quite as key in terms of the exact order as during, say, a non-AF strat. That being said, try to follow the exact order and the setup of the team and the content creator you are watching so that your results end up being around the same. Remember that even with the right same speed setup, there is a 10% differential, so you might actually have some RNG effect where one unit happens to act before the other, even though you're following exactly what the content creator is doing. So keep in mind, there is some variance there. Usually it's not a big deal. However, you can always try it once you follow and see if you get the hits or not. Like, for example, in this case with Nakoko acting, that hit with the heal may be required to act first, or it doesn't really matter if it acts later on. And finally, one thing about following an AF video, remember that higher speed on your front four during the AF matters a lot, because at certain speed breaks, that is, for example, 255 or higher, for example, or 300-ish, or there's actually a chart on the AE Wiki that discusses at which point certain speed breakpoints matter. You actually can result in more moves during the AF, which results in more rounds, more DPS, and more setup of either buffs and debuffs. You will have to make a note of the speed of the units of the video you're following and make sure you have close, if not the exact setup with that. Now, one thing I didn't do is remember that during the AF, make a mental note of the order of the moves for the setup, and then tailor your controls to have your DPS or spam move in a certain spot, like for example on spot number 4. So, in conclusion, hopefully this video does help you to understand kind of like the basics of what my opinion is into determining the key points of watching a video and following along to ensure success against super boss fights. Now, I do realize that not everyone will have exactly the same roster or Grasta or things like that. Even light and shadow might make a difference. And in this case, most of the content creators that are on YouTube are very happy to answer your questions and help you along in your quest to defeat certain super bosses. Otherwise, they wouldn't be making the video at all. I mean, they're there to kind of help you along, to showcase certain units' abilities, and so on and so forth. And so they have most likely also tried multiple ways of beating the boss, and they can probably tell you whether or not certain things are absolutely required versus optional versus you'll have to try and see, because sometimes you can squeak by with a little bit less DPS. Sometimes you can overkill it, and so obviously you have a wide range of safety when doing that. And again, you can always clarify whether or not you can substitute certain units or certain pieces of equipment and whether or not that would be successful. One last quick thing to mention, I didn't go over pain or poison Grasta. I assume everyone kind of knows how to get that, and you should have multiple copies of things like pain with pain setting, or bullseye, enemy numbers, and MP consumption, things like that. For further information about key Grasta setups and kind of the difference in damage when you have certain types of Grasta, I'll leave a link to my Back to Basics video on Grasta up to 2.8.5, which covered the basics of kind of understanding the Grasta system, which really is the key to the main amounts of DPS you can find in the game. Anyways, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.